Okay, I guess it's time to get the show on the road. So welcome everyone to this second in a series of 7 Forrest Delson dialogues. And today's topic is on neuroscience and meditation. And so I'd like to just, I'm John Monroe. I'm Delson's business manager and um, member of both Patreons of Delson and Forrest, fan of both. So I'm just going to read a quick introduction. I think everybody knows both these wonderful teachers, but I'll do that just for the record, and for any of you who are coming for the first time. And these are obviously very cursory and don't even begin to cover the amazing careers of these two individuals. So Delson Armstrong is a trailblazing meditation teacher and author who leads students to deep personal transformation through traditional and innovative approaches. Affable and playfully irreverent, Delson takes meditation beyond mindfulness to bring access to rarefied states such as jhana, deep peace, cessation, awakening experiences, and mundane nibbana, or enlightenment in this lifetime. Forrest Knudsen is a meditation teacher, author, and former monk with over 30 years of experience in Kriya Yoga. Known for blending ancient yogic practices with modern neuroscience, Forrest focuses on teaching practical techniques to cultivate relaxation and achieve profound meditative states. Through his approachable style, online courses, and engaging YouTube content, he demystifies meditation and makes it accessible to students of all levels, emphasizing the transformative power of breath work, heart rate variability, and the low idle state. So with that introduction, I'd like to get this started. We're planning to go for about 45 minutes of dialogue, possibly as much as an hour, and then we'll open it up to questions. And we're aiming for 90 minutes this time, if we can do that. It's late at night for Delson and early in the morning for me here in Tokyo. So, all right, welcome to all of you, and welcome Forrest and Delson. So I'd just like to launch it with a question to each of you. How do you define the role of neuroscience in understanding meditation? And maybe I'll give it to you first, Forrest, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Good morning or good evening. And John, it's 1 a.m., right? So amazing. Thank you.
Actually, 1:35.
1:35. Wow. All right. Well, not too bad then. That's pretty early. So amazing. And so how do we define neuroscience and understanding meditation? I think when the heart of yoga, which some people don't understand, is that to attempt to go straight into deep meditation is nearly impossible. And I've seen certain groups or certain systems which are attempting that, and they will flat out tell you, look, this is extremely rare to get right. And so they just try it again and again and again and again. And they have a certain percentage of success because they're doing it all the time. And yoga says, look, if you've got a body, what if you use the body to create what I call the low idle state, right? So you're using the body and the body is reflecting back on the mind. There's this comes from Todd Murphy, and he goes, look, you've got, or he's the one that, I think he's the one that pointed this out. So you've got a brain and you've got a body and you've got a certain percentage of signals that are coming out from the brain and a certain percentage of signals that are coming from the body going back to the brain. And that percentage is always heavy on the body. And the way I think about that is that you've got a general and you've got an army. And you always have to get more information from the army than the general. The general makes one decision, says one thing, and it goes out to the army. but the army has to constantly feel the battlefield and report back to the general. And so that's the way your brain and your body are set up. And I think I think I called it the 80-20 rule. I did an ancient video about this. And so that's the setup. So, my God, that's the biggest lever in the room. That 80% is at your disposal to make a change in your mind. And so all you have to do is calm the body, and that's going to change your mind. And now you're going to enter into this low idle state. And so right away, we're affecting the mind through the body. So in my view, it's absolutely essential. And then to understand what's happening in the brain, it really just, have you ever listened to somebody and they can be a really beautiful speaker, and you go, my God, that's so inspiring. And then you walk away and you go, well, what do I do with it? And you don't know what to do with it, right? And you're like, it was great. I loved it. And it was, or maybe sometimes it's very airy fairy, right? So somebody talks about something that's very, very airy fairy. And then you ask them, so how does that translate into your life? It was very nice up here in the air, but where did it translate into you? Where does the rubber meet the road? And they don't know. I have no idea how that fits. And so I the monks were very good at this. God bless them. They were very good at saying these big, beautiful things. And then you're like, I don't see that where that fit. I lived with them. So I'm like, where does that fit? And they had no idea. And well, I went into my own crisis. So I was doing their version of the what is actually the second and the third Kriya. They called it the third and the fourth Kriya. And I started having massive Kundalini symptoms. I had huge magnetic knot at my spiritual eye, and it was just a huge crisis. And I had to take everything in my life and just kind of nail it right down to the floor. Everything has to be nailed to the floor. And I think it's kind of grew out of that I started figuring out the body and the brain. And I think it's to me, it's the very best way to understand spirituality, because now we know how it's actually functioning. And so you guys, by the way, are the proof. My students who are here, they're the proof. It's just absolutely gorgeous to watch, because when you tell somebody all this airy fairy stuff and you're like, go out and do it, they're like, but I don't know how that, there's always, we don't know how to apply it, right? Well, you tell them, well, this is in your brain. This is your right brain, access some expansion. They go out, they go do it. And they come back and they're like, I had this great success. I had this great state of being that I was in. And they just go do it because it's practical. So that's kind of magical.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Delson, from your perspective, what would you have to say about the role of neuroscience in understanding meditation?
Yeah, so actually, the way I look at it from the perspective of TWIM and Buddhism in general, we think about Buddha as being one of the first sort of, psychoanalysts, somebody who actually went into the depths of how this process of mind actually works. And you will see that in the suttas, in the Pali Canon, there's a lot of reference to something known as dependent origination. And dependent origination is essentially, how does the mind create its own suffering, but also how do we reverse that process of suffering? How do we actually go from the first noble truth, which is there is suffering in this world, that's stress and anxiety and depression and so on, and understand the causes and how to let go and release those causes. And by the way, releasing those causes is very much in tandem with what Forrest says, which is relaxing, calming the body, calming the mind. When you calm the body, the mind follows suit. When the mind is calm, the body is calm. And there is this interrelationship between calm and joy. That's to say, when the mind and body are tranquil, there is a sense of joy that arises. And vice versa. When there's a feeling of joy, obviously the body is relaxed. So the Buddha saw this with regards to his practice when he was meditating under the Bodhi tree, and he reminisced about his time when he was a young boy during the harvest season with his father, and he was meditating under the rose apple tree, and that was a very pleasant memory for him. So he took that memory, and that memory became his beginning of his object, let's say, that led to the jhanas. We'll get into what the jhanas are, but the jhanas are essentially meditative attainments, meditative states that lead to further insight, collectedness, and clarity of mind. So, and then the Buddha discovered or rediscovered this process of dependent origination. Dependent origination is the process of how the mind is actually perceiving reality, how it creates samsara, how it creates this idea of this is me, this is mine, this is myself. It mistakes that which is permanent as impermanent, that which is that which is impermanent as permanent, that which is suffering as happiness, that which is impersonal as personal. And he realized that using the Eightfold Path, which is a prescription for how to lead a good life, essentially, because you have good thoughts, good speech, and good action. And by doing this, your mind becomes automatically collected. It becomes calmer. And as it becomes calmer and more collected, you're able to then stabilize the mind into meditation. And through that, you receive the same insights that the Buddha received. Now, when it comes to neuroscience, I've actually been part of a couple of research studies. One was at the University of Amsterdam, and the other was for Mass General Hospital I think it was in tandem with Harvard. And what they were studying was essentially this state called cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And it is a very high degree of meditative attainment in which the mind completely withdraws from the outside world and switches off. It doesn't go unconscious. And neuroscience has shown, or the initial data has shown, that it is different from a person being unconscious or asleep. There's something else that's going on here when the mind experiences this. What I found really interesting is that in the initial research, it says that the state seems very similar to someone under high doses of ketamine. I found that quite interesting and a little funny, because what we're saying is that this practice is much better than drugs, right? Much better than getting into a K-hole. But the idea here is there is something there that is beyond just the waking state, beyond the sleeping, the dreaming state and the dreamless state. And neuroscience is starting to prove this, this possibility, this potential. And I think if we continue to work with neuroscience to show what kind of shifts are happening in the brain through MRI and through other EEG and so on, we can start to verify and validate a lot of the things that we see in the old texts with reference to meditation and samadhi and, these high elevated states.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a list of questions, which I might jump around a little bit, and please feel free to preempt me with anything you'd rather talk about. I'm curious how the brain, what changes actually happen in the brain during meditative absorption, such as the jhanas. So I'd like to ask you, Delson, in a minute to talk more about the jhanas. But first, I'd like to ask Forrest, how would you define meditative absorption and what's going on in the brain when that's happening?
Perfect. Well, that state that Delson was talking about, that's the yogis call that Triya, the fourth state, right? So it's not sleeping, it's not dreaming, it's not wake. That's the three. So now we've got this fourth state, which is beyond the other three. So you're not awake, you're not asleep, you're not dreaming. It's this fourth state, that's gorgeous. So when we're in the world, we are using processes which are associated with the left hemisphere of the brain. And people will argue with this. And there's a debate. And what happened was, the left-right brain became very, very popular. And as it became very popular, the neuroscientists are like, oh, this is too much of a fad. It's no good anymore. Let's research something else. And they got discouraged because they saw that when you have a thought, it kind of bounces around inside of your head. So there's cross currents going through the brain. They're like, okay, so it doesn't really matter, this left-right brain thing. That was their second conclusion. But then Ian McGilchrist is bringing back that first conclusion and kind of giving it in a new light and saying, well, yes, there are currents going through both sides of the brain. Obviously, you're using your whole brain all the time, but you have you could say a sense of identification with the processes. And when you're identified with the processes which are taking place in the left brain, that's left brain identification. When you're using those processes in the right brain, you're more identified with those. And you can, so instead of making it all theoretical, let's try it out. So here we are, we're talking, we're concentrated. That's all left brain processes. And if you take just a moment, maybe you can look at your room and try and see your field of vision as one large circle. So I've got field of vision here and up here and down here and down here. Just make it one big circle, take in everything. And if you can really, really take it in, like really feel like you're really trying to see that outside edge. Don't worry about the center. Take in the outside edge. You might have a split second or maybe several seconds where you can do that perfectly and all thoughts will stop. So you can be thinking and then you do it perfectly and the thoughts stop. Now, why is that? Well, because you just exited the left hippocampus. The left hippocampus is the part of your brain that has memory and it has words. And so the yada, 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 that's all your left hippocampus. Okay? And so when you did that, when you looked at that outside edge and for a split second, you really took it in that moment, the words stopped because now you are associated with the right hippocampus. And the right hippocampus does not use those. It has the actual knowing of a thing. So when you look at a tree, I've got my Christmas tree up over here. So I'm looking at a tree. As I see the tree and I know it's a tree and I label it, that label, T-R-E-E, that's a left hippocampus function. But to actually know what that is, right? To actually know the picture of the tree, the knowing and the picture and the light that makes the picture is all the right hippocampus. So now we have the center of knowing and the center of light. It's starting to sound really quite spiritual, isn't it? And that's your right hippocampus. And so the so we've got memory, we've got words, and we've got the sense of your body, which is the left parietal lobe, and the association with your life, which is the left temporal lobe. And those two are usually spoken of in the same breath. So a lot of times the neuroscientists won't even break that apart. They'll just put it together and say that your life is a hallucination based on the temporal parietal lobe. It's actually two separate functions, and I only separate those because in our world, we have out-of-body experiences, and then we have what Delson was mentioning, this fourth state, right? So we've got the non-dual state. So those, we have a separation of those. Neuroscience isn't very interested in that just yet. And so that's why I break those apart, but they will actually put them together. But anyway, those are, let's see, memory, words, the sense of your body, and the sense of your life. And what I mean that is the whole kit and caboodle of what you call your life. That is a temporal lobe function. You are hallucinating. And that's how you can have a memory, and your sister can have them, or your brother or somebody can have a memory from your childhood. And you say the memory together and they say, no, I was there. That's not what happened, because they're actually living in a separate world that is filtering through their senses and is affected by their personal filters, because we all delete and distort. There's way too much information for your brain to process. So it just throws it out. And so you've got, if this is how much information you're getting in every second, this is crazy to me. This is how much you're actually processing of that information. And so you're like, okay, this guy is extremely successful. This guy is not. How did that happen? That's how it happened. They're functioning with two different sets of filters, and it creates an entirely different world. So you have in one moment all these different worlds which are possible and taking place. And so all of that is processed. The movie of your life is processed through the temporal lobe. So all of those are left brain functions. And as soon as we quiet the body and start heading to silence, we're immediately heading to the realm of the right brain. So it's the quietness and the silence and eventually the expansiveness, which starts pushing us towards the right brain. And so the deep absorb. So there's the what is it? It's four, right? The first set of jhanas are the process of, I would say, quieting the body and getting towards that right brain. And then in the immaterial jhanas, you're actually beginning to taste the right brain. You're actually getting a feeling or perception, and you are, I would say, I like to say, become the holy potato and just soak in that absorption, that thing that you are feeling, whether it's expansiveness or the deep intelligence, the knowing that you're sensing, or it's the nothing that you are sensing, or it's this pure perception of your own mind and the stillness that comes with it, the silence. If you're perceiving any of that and you can soak in that, now you're bathing in the processes of your right brain, and that associates you more and more and more closely. It gets easier and easier. That channel opens up. So it's all about, but that's the process. It's from here to here, and it's a process of identification. And so as soon as we used, and we make it so hard. It is difficult because everything in our life is geared towards the left, especially in the West. It's like, do. Wake up, be on time, get in your car, get down the road. Oh my God, I'm going to be late. Oh my God, I have a deadline. It's on and on and on and on and on and on. And it's all encouraging the left brain processes. And so what we're doing is completely 180 degrees. And so it is difficult. And yet at the same time, look at what we did. We just And just for a moment, now, okay, so you notice that the word stop, this is the way I would have fun with this one. So I can look out here, I can see different objects, and I can label those objects. And when I enter into the peripheral, there comes a moment, even if it's a split second. Oh, I love seeing the eyes dilate as this goes on. There's no more labels. That's fun to me. All the labels evaporate for just a moment. So, yeah, did I answer the question? I think I did, right?
You did. You certainly did. I'm a little surprised that I actually found the words to respond. Because that was such a, I could just see us sitting here for the next 45 minutes.
we all, what happened? They all went up in a chariot of fire. We can't find them.
So, right, I'll head it over to you, Delson.
What was the question?
So the original question was, what brain changes occur during meditative absorption, such as the jhanas? I think at this point we could just riff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was really absorbed by what Forrest was saying, because it's exactly my line of thinking with regards to the first four jhanas and then the immaterial planes. Because that's exactly the way I look at it is, like when we talk about the first jhana, what we're saying is that it is so in this in the Pali Canon and the experience of my students and people who practice this, is they will notice that there's a seclusion from sensual pleasures. That's what the Pali Canon says. In other words, you close your eyes, so now you shut off all of the sensory data coming in from your eyes, which is a huge portion of all of the stuff that comes in. You can't shut off your ears just yet. You can't shut off the other senses, but you shut off the eyes, which is a huge portion of data. Now, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. That's a very interesting point. What do we mean by unwholesome states? We're talking about states that cause the mind agitation, that cause movement in the mind, that create disturbance in the mind. Like, oh, I could really use an ice cream sundae right now. Or, why did she break up with me? Or, these kinds of thoughts that come up. And these are called hindrances in the Pali Canon. And they can arise in different kinds of ways. So you're quite secluded from sensual pleasures, and then you let go of this. How do you let go of it? You recognize that the mind is going through this. You release those thoughts. You've relaxed back into the mind and body. Consciously relax. You open up a spacious experience in the mind already. So that, to me, that translates into what Forrest is talking about, where you're seeing the circle, but this is happening it's internalized, where you're expanding your focus or you're expanding your view internally with your eyes closed. And this starts to reduce all of those kinds of thoughts and labeling. And then eventually what happens is you experience some level of joy. You experience some level of calm, joy, and comfort. Piti and sukha, as they're known in Pali. Sukha, I like to use a translation, comfort. There's a certain level of ease and comfort in the body, and there's a certain level of emotional joy in the heart or in the body itself as well. And as you get through these jhanas, what you're noticing is that the second jhana, for example, the thinking and examining thought goes away. So the intentionalizing of I have to do this, or I have to bring up an object, or bringing up an object itself goes away, because now the mind is in a certain kind of flow. And being in that flow, it goes into the third, where the mind experiences greater tranquility in mind and body. It experiences perhaps a little bit more expansiveness, like the edges between the body and the outside world start to diminish. So there's no more like a border of what's going on. And by the time you get into the fourth, there's like mostly the feeling up in the head. Everything else down here is kind of just gone. Unless there's some kind of contact, like a fly lands on your skin or something, you might feel that. But otherwise, it's just like completely bodiless, or feels like it's bodiless. And then at that point, there's such a great level of what I call mindfulness, that the ability to just remain present to what's going on becomes so heightened, and the mind becomes so equanimous that eventually you don't have to do anything. And this, in the fourth jhana, there's a lot of things that you can do with the mind. Like in the Yoga Sutras, there's a whole section in the Yoga Sutras about siddhis, and how to obtain these siddhis. And you need samyama, you need dhyana, dharana, and samadhi to bring these together, and then put it on a particular object in order to unlock, let's say, a DLC, a siddhi. So the fourth jhana is that. It's the culmination of all of that put together, where now you can actually direct the mind towards something that you want to achieve. And generally, we don't go in that direction. What we do is then we expand out. We expand out into infinite space. And at this point, you're no longer in the body. Like the feeling that's there is you are now part of this infinite space. There's nothing going on. And what's interesting is the way I teach it is we do this in tandem with what are known as the Brahma Viharas. This is like the cute baby meditation, right? You think about a cute baby or a puppy or something, and that evokes a feeling of loving kindness. And so you start off with that, and that transforms into compassion, and you radiate that out to all beings in all directions, and you immediately feel that expansion. And then that goes into, as Forrest would say, the infinite intelligence, or what we would call infinite consciousness, where you're starting to see it all as part of your awareness, and that there's no difference between the two. But you go even deeper, and you start to see the let's say the frames of reality. Like you start to see how the mind starts to process reality internally to such an extent that you start to go between the arising of one frame and the arising of another frame. Like you can see how nothingness is between each level or layer of awareness that comes and goes, comes and goes, comes and goes. And then in this expansive nothingness, there's a deep level of equanimity. So there's compassion, then there's joy, and then that goes into equanimity. The mind is very stable in that. And then we get into some very interesting, trippy territory called neither perception nor non-perception. It's like the mind neither perceives nor not perceives. Now, in Buddhist terminology, when we talk about that labeling process where you see, oh, that's the color red, or, that's the picture of the Buddha behind me, that awareness, that knowingness is how Buddhist terminology would say is the vijnana. It's the bare cognition plus the labeling of what it is as perception. So there's three things that come up. There's feeling, there's perception, and there's consciousness, which is usually translated as consciousness, but it's cognition, the bare cognizance of something. So the feeling, the Vedana, it's not an emotional feeling. It's the actual experience of the senses or the experience of the mind. And tied to that, or in tandem to that, is the cognition of what is being perceived. And the perception of that is labeling what is there. So in this territory of neither perception nor non-perception, it's neither recognition nor non-recognition, like neither labeling nor not labeling. As soon as something comes up, there's like, it just goes away. Like you're not able to fully comprehend what it is that you're seeing. And it's like the mind is, in a good way, breaking down. It's coming to the level of what's known as samskaras or sankharas. And the way I look at sankharas or samskaras I see it this way, is they are the synapses of the brain. And every time we can go through this process of purifying and transforming the samskaras, we are actually having a neuroplastic effect. We are actually creating a change in our synapses by doing this. So I don't know what the question was, but that's my answer.
That's great. Thank you. I was actually thinking of skipping down to this question for Forrest, which is how does neuroplasticity support the benefits of regular practice? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
How does neuroplasticity support the benefits of regular practice? It's perhaps a
Yeah, yeah. So beautiful. I love what Delson said. That was gorgeous. Neuroplasticity. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do, and we don't quite. I think. Well, I do timeline therapy, right? And the funniest thing is when somebody perceives that because of the work that we do, it's a very, very powerful reframing of an experience. So the experience is there, but you are floating around it in such a way that you get a chance to reframe how you see it. And so Tad would have us. So here's an interesting question and we mentioned some scars, right? And so that would be the memory of all your experience, right? And so your subconscious actually organizes all of those memories in a line. And so you can actually get in touch with that. You can kind of get a sense of it and actually see it and feel it. So without thinking, don't try and, don't work it out in your head, but just point to your future. Go ahead and physically point to your future. So I'm going to point to my future. And just go ahead and point to your future, wherever you think it might be. And then point to your past. Perfect. There you go. And those 2 points, if you were able to do that, if you weren't able to do that, what did you have for breakfast a week ago? Go ahead and point to that. And, and then maybe you're going to brush your teeth. I'm sure you're going to brush your teeth in a week from now. So go ahead and point to that, And so so those 2 points form a line, right? So that's your timeline. And so there are 2 main timelines that you might have. One is back to front, and one is other people like me. We put it in front of us. We like to see everything at once. We like to see it all the time. And so those are 2 primal basic ways that people store their samskaras. That's how the subconscious, and so you're a kid, you're a little baby, and you're like, okay, this is an experience, and you start to organize it from there. And usually the past is behind and the future is in front, usually. And so to do the timeline, we go back to the very first event, because all of your emotional experiences will be stored in the subconscious as one long grouping called a gestalt. And so we want to go to the very beginning of that gestalt. We want to get so in other words, we want to get to the root of the root. We don't want to pull off the top of the dandelion. We want to dig out the whole root. And so we go to the very, very beginning. And then from that place, we kind of look at it, we float above it. And that floating above is actually using a little bit of the perspective of the right brain. And so when we entered into that state, we looked at the peripheral and we lost all the labels. That was the right brain. And so in timeline therapy, you're touching that part of your brain as well. And that's part of the success of timeline therapy. So it's a really, really powerful reframe on the things that happened to me, right? And because of that, you change your mind about how you feel about it or how you label it. So you change the labels or you change the feeling. But the experience is there. We're not rewriting the past or anything. The experience is the experience. But if there's one little tiny bare shred of a lesson that I can walk away with that makes me more powerful, that's what I'm interested in. Not in, oh my God, this horrible thing happened and now I'm weaker. No, I want to walk away more powerful because I survived this horrible thing, whatever it was. And that's the learning. So you get the learning, you reframe. And so what happens amazingly is that, so we're back there. The negative emotion is gone. It's just the subconscious lets it go and it's just gone. And people are not used to watching this huge negative emotion. I just had it 5 minutes ago and now it's gone. And so that we'll just sit there and I'll wait for them very lovingly. I love them because they're letting go of these really hard things to let go of, right? And so I'm very lovingly waiting for them to catch up with me and realize that they've let it go. And they're not ready for it because everything in our modern life. So I did this with a young man and he was molested as a child and horribly, right? And everybody in his life told him that he was basically damned for the rest of his life. And I knew this. I saw his parents. I heard what they said. I heard what he was saying. And so I knew this before the therapy, right? And so he walks into the room and so I'm like, what's the problem? He tells me the problem. He's like very, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. I'm like, some guy touched you. So what? And the shock of that just, I could see it was really, I wanted to help break it up a little bit before the therapy. And then we did the timeline therapy and he totally let it go. But everybody, his teachers, his therapists, everybody told him you're damned. And in one session, he let it go. He went back to school. His grades went back up. His friendships went back up. He stopped being, just in a horrible place constantly. His whole life transformed. And that's neuroplasticity. That's neuroplasticity, right? And that's what we're doing. And we're doing it on this very, very profound level where, like Delson was talking about, we're not just talking about these things. It's not a talk therapy. No, we're going straight into these perceptions deep in the brain. And we're just, like, I'm going to get to the heart of this. And I'm like Buddha, I mean, it's so amazing. Like what did you say? The very first person to break this apart. And oh my God, isn't that beautiful? Like, I'm going to get down there. I'm going to understand this. We're going to pull it apart. Just beautiful. Just beautiful. Yeah. So
Forrest, what would you I mean, how would you say timeline therapy, where does it come from or what is it exactly? Like that's very interesting to me.
So it comes from NLP, and they had a technique of reframing where they would walk along the timeline. And when they wanted to get rid of a negative emotion, they would do a process called collapsing anchors. And it's really cumbersome. It kind of works, but in my experience, it doesn't always work because it's such a cumbersome technique. But it does actually occasionally work. And so that was the thing that they would use to get rid of, to wipe out a negative emotion. So you would have one negative emotion and then you would overwhelm it with a bunch of other healthier emotions. And that would collapse the negative emotion. But then you would be kind of wiped out. And those positive things would be slightly wiped out as well. And so it kind of worked. It was kind of cumbersome. Took a really long time. And so Tad James has been studying NLP with Bandler and Grinder, these formative people of NLP, right? And so he's at a bus stop and he's just playing around with this woman who's waiting for the bus with him. And she's angry about something. And so he's walking her along her timeline to reframe her, right? And she's walking back along the timeline. They're at the bus stop waiting for the bus, and he has her turn around. And he goes, "Okay, now where's your anger?" And he's just asking a question, right? And she goes, "It's gone." And he's like, "No, it's not." And she goes, "No, it's gone." He goes, "That's impossible." Because it was a big anger and she just let it go while he's reframing her. He's like, "That's not possible." She goes, "No, it's gone." It's my anger. What are you telling me? It's gone. And he freaks out. He goes back, he investigates, he keeps playing with it, and he develops timeline therapy. And it's when it first happens to you, you're like, "What just happened to me? I don't get it." And I've had sessions where it wiped out the thing we were trying to wipe out so strongly that they can't remember the problem. And that's I mean, that's such a beautiful example of neuroplasticity. It's just crazy to me. So I have on Patreon, I have classes where I'm teaching it to everybody. So, you know, you can anybody can go through those videos and you can kind of follow along with your own emotions and see what happens for you. And the thing about timeline therapy is when there are certain conditions. So if we have an agreement with our subconscious mind. So in other words, okay, I have some anger, sadness, fear, hurt, or guilt, right? And I say about one of those emotions, I say, "Hey, gut, would it be okay if I let that go?" So I have to have an agreement with my subconscious mind. Yeah, it's okay to let it go. If you don't have that agreement, you have to sit there and talk your subconscious into it. Because if your subconscious, so something really big happened to me, and I say, my conscious mind says, "Oh, I don't like this. I want to let that go." But my gut says, "No, I'm not done with it." My subconscious says, "No, that person hurt me, and I want them to know that they hurt me." Now I'm in a conflict. I have what's called secondary gain. I'm consciously and subconsciously not integrated. I can't let it go until I have that agreement. So that's the first thing. And then I have to get above, and I have to get before the very first event. And those are the three things. Those are the three conditions. And if you can do that, and so again, it's a gestalt, right? It's not one thing. So people will tell you about a negative emotion that they have, and they'll tell you about the event where they really remember it. Maybe it's 10 or 12 or, these teen years, right? But the actual formation of when they begin to recognize that particular negative emotion is usually 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Like 3 is the biggest number where we really start to label our emotions. And that's just, you're a kid and you go, "Ah," and you don't know what it is. And then the next day you do it again. "Ah," you don't know what it is, but you're storing the memory in your timeline. And then you go, "Ah," and your mom goes, "You're angry." And you go, "Oh my God, I'm angry." And you label all of those things, and it starts to form this label that you carry through your whole life. And so it's one of the things I just really love. And as we're studying the timeline therapy, I'm like, "Oh my God, this is Kriya." Because the Kriya is, especially in the Om Japa Kriya, the original Kriya, is really trying to wipe out, as it is projected down into the chakra, it's really trying to wipe out these seed memories, right? And by disrupting them over and over and over again. And then in that disruption, you get the learning. And so there's this, Patanjali's got this little thing about Kriya Yoga, and he's talking about the, so you're in the process of Kriya, you're canceling out, right? There's a cancellation which is taking place. And the autobiography of a yogi loves to talk about that little canceling out, right? And when I learned timeline therapy, Tad was talking about, well, you're above and before, and it's canceling out. Oh, timeline, beautiful, love that. I love it. Yeah, somebody's holding up the book of the timeline. I love it. So that is Herbert. Thank you. And so that is, yeah. So it cancels out just like some of that theory is the same, right? I'm like, oh my God, it's Kriya. So yeah, I love timeline therapies. Crazy, amazing technology.
I have to interject us to ask Delson. I mean, having done the twin practice, the forgiveness is a big part of that, and that's another way to approach these traumas that I've experienced, where you can go back into things that have been lifelong, burdens, and they could just vanish and become, if anything, kind of beautiful sources of energy when that happens. So I'm curious. Delson, like, how do you see that? And then I also would like to ask Forrest, like, what do you think is going on in the brain in those practices? But I just could open that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I see forgiveness um as a very powerful practice. I mean, I think I've said this last week as well, and I'll keep saying it because I've seen how people have had like these energetic blockages in their heart center and unable to really feel love for themselves, unable to accept themselves for who they are, unable to accept, everything that they are all about. Like two of the things that I always encounter in retreats is people's um, desire to try really hard, which is actually counterintuitive to any practice because they're so gung ho about it. It actually engages the left brain, right? Because you're like, I have to do this, I have to do this. So it's like more of that. And the second is not being able to accept things as they are, and that really is not being able to accept who you are as a person or how you see yourself as a person. And so forgiveness is such a, I mean, I spoke about this last week where, forgiveness is, it's a practice developed by Bhante Vimarahamsi, who rediscovered this process called TWIM from studying the suttas, the original suttas of the Buddha. And he um, he developed forgiveness as a remedial process to the twin practice. So the twin practice is loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, going through the jhanas, experiencing the non-dual states, and so on. But then he also saw that forgiveness is such a powerful practice. He did it himself when he was not a monk, as a layperson in, I think at the time he was in Hawaii, if I remember correctly. But in any case, he did this for many years and he saw a lot of benefit from it. And I remember talking to him about that, and I asked him, where did you actually develop? How did you actually develop the forgiveness practice? And he gave me a book called Who Dies by Stephen Levine. And it's a really, really good book. It's about, the dying process, but also the grieving process. And in there, Stephen Levine talks about forgiveness. And so Bhante Ramsey took that and then he kind of put his own spin on it. And that's where we have the forgiveness practice in the TWIM community, in where you say, I forgive myself for not understanding, or you say to another person, I forgive you for not understanding. So, and I've taken that a couple of steps forward, and I've helped sort of customize it even further, depending upon a student's requirements and how they're feeling in that moment. Because what I've also led them to do is to be able to actually go back to your inner child, right? The memory of you as a child, and when you actually felt that hurt, and forgive yourself for it. And then see the other person who's harmed you or you felt has harmed you, and see them as their inner child. And immediately you feel compassion, you feel empathy, you feel kindness, you feel loving kindness for them. And how can you not forgive them? And you have to remember, forgiveness is not a process of it's not a process to receive forgiveness or forgive the other person. It's always going back to you. It's always about getting peace of mind for yourself, right? Letting go of the guilt, letting go of the resentment. Sometimes what people will do is they'll say, I want this person to forgive me. And they might go through that process and accept them forgiving you. And that might be helpful. But sometimes what I'll tell them is, what if you were to forgive them for not forgiving you, right? Forgive them for not forgiving you. That's the best you can do, is you can just work on yourself. And so recently on my Patreon, I released a video called The 3 Levels of Forgiveness. And that's basically forgiving yourself for not understanding. And then that translates to forgiving others who have caused you harm. And then forgiving the world at large. Because this is how we interpret the world, is it's us first, and then the people closest to us, who are usually the ones that hurt us the most. And it's the world and the expectations that we have of the world. And when that is letting us down, we feel disillusioned, we feel disappointed, we feel apathetic, we feel lethargic, we feel dejected. So we should be able to also forgive the world at large, So, I don't know if forgiveness is explicitly mentioned in the Pali Canon, but I think when the Buddha talks about letting go of resentment, this is what he's pointing at.
Thank you. So I did say that we would open it up for questions by the hour, but I also said that I would ask Forrest what's going on in the brain with the timeline therapy and the forgiveness. So perhaps we could address that, and then we'll open it up for questions.
That was beautiful, Delson. Thank you. And thank you, John. Such a powerful reframe, right? So I was talking about reframing, and what you just said, that's absolutely magnificent, very, very powerful reframing that you're walking through. And, to think about that this is a natural process as you enter into dying. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mentions these stages of transition that we go through. And she was studying death and dying, and then she out of that, she said, well, this doesn't just apply to death and dying, but it's actually every single change. And she made a really powerful statement. She goes, people won't die until they accept. There's a level of acceptance that they have to enter before they allow themselves to let go of the body. And so you see some people which will, have a horrible disease and they'll die early. And then you'll see people that have a horrible disease and the doctors can't figure out how they're still alive. And she said, that's why, that they have not reached acceptance for whatever reason. Maybe they're hanging on for somebody else, but they have not reached acceptance, and they actually have to enter into acceptance from her study in order to let go. And so that's a crazy, amazing statement, right? And then now think about us meditators, right? And we're trying to let go of this story, which is kind of a knot. And we've just got all these knotted up emotions and things, and just, oh my God, all these things that we're holding on to, right? And we have to let go of all of that to get into this expansive state, which is in the right brain. And so every single time that we let go of something, we are learning that process of letting go. And you just become, I was thinking the other day about this in Om Japa and the chakras, that you're constantly learning to let go. And that you're just letting go and letting go and letting go and letting go. And it gets easier and easier and easier. And pretty soon you're just going into these very deep states very quickly. And you're like, how did that happen? Well, you just got really, really good at letting go. And so that's kind of amazing. Right. So, John, I had to say that because it was really beautiful. And it was kind of tying all together from what Delson was saying. And so, John, you were saying about timeline therapy and what's taking place inside of the brain.
Right.
Right. So this was kind of an aha experience for me that so in the process of timeline therapy, so I figure out where my timeline is, right? So maybe my timeline is here. and then I'm going to float up above it. And like I said, we're going to float before that very first event. And I'm just giving the really broad strokes here, right? So I'm floating way back before that very first event. And while you're floating up there, you're using part of your right brain. And it's really a godlike view of your life. And so that allows you to let go. And then so what's happening in the left hippocampus is you're rewriting how you associate with that story. And then in the right amygdala, and this is why I think it's so hard for us, generally speaking, to let go of things, because the memory is stored in the left hippocampus. But the basis of all, so this is me, this is Forrest talking. I can't quote anybody on this except that, but I'm going to tell you the all negative emotions are based on the right amygdala. And so a funny way to think about this, do you remember Data from Star Trek? And he's always wants the emotion chip. It's like, I got to be human and get the emotion chip. Like that, like that's a good idea. And so his father gives him one chip, but actually it should be divided in two chips. You've got a center of joy and bliss and pure love, like pure motherly love. That's your left amygdala. And then you've got a center which is at its heart, it's pure doom. Like I've gone deep into this and it's just pure doom. It's like, and it's so funny because I was in it. I had this deep experience. I did this thing which you're not supposed to do. And I did it a lot. And it had to do with a technique from Tad. He's like, don't do this because somebody wound up in a hospital. And I'm like, let's do it. And so I did it. And I went deep into I probably shouldn't have done it at night, because it helped me go more. I should have done it in the daytime where it wasn't as dangerous. So I did it deep at night and I went straight into the right amygdala and it was just pure, like, I'm going to die, just pure doom. And it was funny because I could see my rational brain going, there's no reason. There's no reason. And yet I could feel this absolute just doom. And so that's the heart of your negative emotions. I believe that if you don't have that fear, and this aligns with the chakras as well. If you don't have that fear, think about it, all of your negative emotions. If I had absolute zero fear, could I actually entertain those negative emotions? It would be really hard, right? If you had zero fear. So I believe all of our negative emotions are supported by the right amygdala. So there's probably other parts of the brain which are going to be at play, but the basis is the fear, the doom. And so here on this side of the brain, you've got the story. And then here on this side of the brain, and I'm sorry I'm making this long. I know we want to have questions, but so you're trying to solve this riddle of your life, right? And you've got the story on one side, you've got the negative emotion, the basis stored on the other side. How are you going to untie a knot which is in two places? And so in the timeline therapy, you're floating before the story. And that's the magic of it. And when you're doing the inner child, you're floating past the story as well. You're floating into the childhood. So really, again, really powerful reframe. And so now you've got the story out of the way, you can actually address the emotion directly. And the subconscious, if it's ready, will let it go. And so that's what's taking place. I believe that's what's taking place in the timeline therapy, that you're undoing the knot. This story is usually a Gordian knot and people cannot untie it. And they just sit there and they go, why? And that's the wrong question. You've got to do a different process. You cannot solve it from why did this happen to me? It's impossible. That's a Gordian knot. And so you have to untie it by floating before the story. And you got to get around it one way or another. You got to do some kind of powerful reframe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so perhaps we could go to the questions then. And there are a couple in the chat. There's one that's sort of a little off topic, so I'll save that to the last and see if we get to it, or we'll pick it up in a future talk. So I'll start with Harry's iPhone. And if you would just unmute, and then please keep the questions fairly brief so that we have time for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Delson and Forrest. I have each have a one question for them. So Delson first. From the introduction, I understand that you had learned from Forrest, and you authorized to teach the third year. And from your past experience, you had a lot of yoga experiences. And you mentioned in the last couple of talks that in the future, you might use some of the techniques from yoga to address the students doing the twin. So my question for you is, as a twin practitioner, and what part you think it's very helpful for us to further the twin practice from the Kriya Yoga? I already bought the book and I listened to a couple of videos from Forrest, and I found a lot of things very interesting. And like some of the Anapana have done 10 years, and he explained that, I was, wow, that's exactly how I experienced it. And I try a little bit techniques, and I get more deeper into the Anapana. So for Delson, what part is you think is very helpful for the twin practitioners on these techniques?
I think it really depends on the context and what serves the practitioner. For example, when I notice that somebody's experiencing fear, what do I recommend? I will recommend, if needed, is Navi Kriya, and that is a Kriya to unknot, oming into the navel and behind the navel, right? So that basically releases that knot of fear, and a person then, it takes the edge off of anything that's going on. Even sometimes when they experience a lot of piti, a lot of joy, it becomes overwhelming to the point it's like, I can't contain it, I can't stop it. So you can use this as a way of regulating that, trying to do that. Another thing is the HRV breathing as a preparatory process for getting into deeper states, right? So these are a couple of things, but it really depends on the person. The Om Japa has its wonderful benefits by, like Forrest was saying, you're the way I explain it is that it's like, and it's just my way of explaining it. It's just, I like to be a little bit more poetic with these things. It's like releasing karmic tension. Like, I see each chakra as a storehouse of different kinds of karma. And like when you do the Om Japa, you're releasing karmic tension. And so that's basically what we're doing with TWIM as well. Every time we use the process of the 6 R's, we're releasing karmic tension, and we're replacing unwholesome states with wholesome states. And that's what's happening with the Om Japa. And that's another great preparation for the mind to go into deeper states of stillness and awareness.
So I have a lot of time. So do you recommend that I go, like, take the full course and run everything and try to use it? But the main focus still on the point. Is that some kind of model that you recommend?
So the way I would do it is, like, you can go ahead and check out all of the resources that Forrest has, and see what is most beneficial for you and what helps you fine-tune your practice. The way I look at it is, like, you can actually choose how you want to do this practice, because at the end of the day, if it gets you towards the cessation of suffering, if it gets you towards the release from suffering, then do that. And you can be an experimenter with this. You can mix and match. You can do what works for you, and find the magic formula that works specifically for your particular mindset, and keep fine tuning. As you get into the jhanas, you might notice that the mind is getting a little too collected. So what do? You relax. It's the same way when you're doing the 7 factors of awakening. You're balancing some factors that the mind experiences total samadhi, right? So you, according to your particular stage or level of practice, if it feels like you want to do the Navi Kriya or the HRV, then the Navi, and then the Om Japa as preparation, and that takes you, that could probably just take you all the way to the 4th jhana or the 5th jhana immediately. You know, it could just skyrocket you there. And then from there, you can just start. Or you can start and you see that you're experiencing fear at the 8th jhana, and it takes too much of an effort to let go of that fear. And what do I recommend there? You go back to equanimity, you radiate equanimity until you become disenchanted with the fear. But if that's not working, before you do your next sit, do the Navi Kriya and then go through the process and see if the fear is there or not anymore.
Thank you.
So you had one for Forrest?
Yeah, I have another question for Forrest. Yeah, thank you, Forrest, for providing such a great information from a different angle that nobody ever, I mean, especially with the science and the meditation together. Actually, about 8-9 years ago, I read the book of a biography of the Yogananda, and I actually signed up for a monthly newsletters from them, and they were telling me how to control the breath and things like that. And the Mahamudra was the first thing I learned, that if there's only one posture, the one thing you do, what is that? That's exactly what you taught, and I practiced that ever since. It's very effective for the meditation. So from my understanding that the Kriya Yoga, I have a question, kind of confusing. Some of the tradition says the Buddha was even from the lineage, right? Buddha was the reincarnation of them. And some of the tradition says, you know, Buddha is enlightened, is above the yoga traditions. So what is your take on the Buddha's teaching? How do you look at the whole thing? And especially the Tuim, you know, we practice the Tuim or the Buddhism, so-called Buddhism. The practice the Buddha's teaching. How do you compare these things, or what's your take on that?
Well, we talked about, that's a great question, and I love what you said and what Delson said, that you know, sometimes I get people that ask me, how did you do this? How did you get into this? How did you figure out your answers? And I think one of the secrets of my own success has been the ability to look at things from different angles. And so having this ability to cross-study with Delson and myself, having 2 points of view, you can kind of see how we are mirroring each other over and over again. But you're looking at it from a slightly different angle with slightly different framing and slightly different words. And that does something to your brain. It starts to make you more flexible. And that flexibility is extremely powerful, especially when you're attempting something so deep as to enter into different parts of your brain, right? Or to get into this low idle state. It's so helpful to be mentally flexible. And I see, even in my own lineages, when I look back at past teachers and past students and the problems that they encountered, I could see that these students were too rigid, that they weren't mentally flexible, and it was actually stopping them. And so having that reframing like we're doing today is extremely powerful. So Delson was talking about cessation and how it's not sleeping, it's not waking, it's not dreaming, it's something else. And that's exactly what the yogis said as well. It's this 4th state, right? So are we absolutely aligned? I think, in my opinion, we are absolutely aligned, and that the states that the Buddha were getting into were exactly these same very, very deep things that the yogis were trying to talk about. And so you can judge one yogi and you can judge the Buddha. I don't think that is fruitful to try and do that. I think that the Buddha was an incredible soul, and we have many incredible teachers, and I think the best thing that we can do is just take as much as we can from these teachers that directly apply to me, make that make that rubber meet the road and make sure it shows up in my life as much as possible, take as much as I can from, and I love to take from everybody. So I love some of the, Saint Teresa of Lisieux and Saint Francis and Buddha and Jesus, and I steal from all of them. I love, in a very loving way, I love to steal from all of them, and they love it too. So they're like, here, steal. I have a funny story. So I studied martial arts with Don on Jay, and he was doing this. He had an old samurai art, and he's teaching it to an Aikido guy. His name was BJ Carlis. And so he's doing the seminar for BJ Carlis, right? So Don is teaching all this complicated martial Aikido Jiu-Jitsu stuff, right? And BJ goes, "Oh God, that was great, Don. Thank you. I'm going to steal that from you." And Don goes, "You can't steal it. I'm giving it away freely." And BJ goes, "Well, that's no fun, Don. I want to steal it. You just took all the fun out of it." And so Don just shakes his head. He says, "Okay, don't do this technique. Never show this technique to anybody." And BJ goes, "Oh, that's much better. Now I can steal it." Just a funny little martial arts story. Yeah. But yeah, I think the Buddha was incredible. And so I think he's right in line with Korea. I think what they were trying to do was right in line.
Great,
Yeah,
you.
I just want to add to that. We should also understand that we don't want to be sectarian here. The idea here is to understand that Buddha was not a Buddhist. Jesus was not a Christian, right? Yeah. There is this game that the world likes to play, that I am better than you, or they're worse off than we are, and all of these things. And this comparing mind is the left brain. It's the mind that says that, I am separate from this. And there's a certain level of tribalism that comes from that. And that's why we have the world's problems that we have now, right? This I am this, or he is that, or she is that, and therefore, they're wrong or I'm right. So I think these kinds of questions only benefit those who are seeking some kind of like, I'm better than thou kind of thing, right? So it's better to see what are the commonalities, what are the things that we can steal, as Forrest says, that can better lead us to the end of suffering, that can better lead us to a life free of any kind of stress and anxiety and depression and grief and sorrow and lamentation.
Yes, sir. That's right. Absolutely. Last question for Forrest. Right now, I bought the book and I have, read the book half the way. So my next plan is apply, register for the videos, the free training you have, each of the videos. And is that the process? Do you have any online training? Kind of like, if I got a question, how can I contact you?
My internet clicked out. Was that question for me?
It was for you, yeah. Forrest. Yeah.
Okay. What was the question? Sorry.
Yeah,
how do you start?
Yeah, I bought the book and I read half the way, and a lot of things really clicked with me. Like the resonant things. The cute babies. It's a lot of experience. I practiced Anapanasati for a long time, and the twin thing. So I want to dig into that to understand more, like the left brain, right brain. How to the consciousness. So my plan is I want to finish the book first, and then I kind of practice and finish the book. And then I go to your website and to buy those courses, the free trainings. And after to finish the training, I wanted to know if there is a next step that I can, or during the process, if I have questions regarding like when I do the HRV things, I feel very huge pressures, and I used to be like in the abdomen, and it's getting stronger and stronger these days. So I have to spend a lot of time to quiet it down. So if I got a question like that, how can I contact you? Or do you offer a online or retreat, something like that? If on-person retreat, I would love to attend and to get more details on it.
Yeah, I don't have a retreat right now, but I have a Patreon. And if you go onto Patreon, there's also a list. It's under one posting. It says how to take Kriya with Forrest. And so you can go into Patreon and you can search that in the group, and that'll give you a list of videos which you might like to see, and they'll kind of help to direct you further. And then you that's a very good place to contact me is from Patreon, because
Okay.
I do get a
Yeah.
lot of email. Yeah, and I have to sort. It's a lot to sort through everything. So I try and pay special close attention to the Patreon correspondence that I get.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on it already. So I will do that. Thank you.
Great. Perfect.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Just because we have a number of people who would like to do questions, so I'd like to try to limit it to one question each and then we could cycle back if there's more, just so that more people have a chance. We're actually coming up to 7 minutes before the time. So Virgil, if you would come in next.
Yes. Hi, Forrest. So I have one question. So I'm doing currently I have a routine that I discussed with the Delson that is based on some techniques from your book. So I do the Mahamudra, I do the HRV breathing, I do the Hakalau. So I do all these three combined in that order as a preparatory stage for my meditation. But we have something here and by the way, the results are great. So as I think I mentioned this to you in the last call, but we have something in Buddhism. It's called sloth and torpor, and that is I don't know if they talk about this in yoga, and that's basically an obstacle. So at some time in the meditation, the mind gets into this dull kind of space because it loses interest in the meditation object, and then from there, if it doesn't get addressed, it gets into this almost like a sleepy state. And then if that doesn't get addressed, then it drops into sleep and you basically take a nap during the meditation. So my question is, do you have any particular technique in the book or some other technique that's not mentioned that I could use during the meditation to energize the mind, the body? Right? Because I like the way you started this. You said we affecting the mind using the body. So I think maybe you have something that I could do. So the way I manage it right now is to do some breath of fire. So when I feel like I get very drowsy, I do some Kapalpati, and that seems to really energize the whole system up. But you can't do that on retreats. Start breathing forcefully. It's very awkward,
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's so fantastic. And I saw somebody say they were talking about a Kriya lineage. They're like, I don't think this Kriya lineage is good, and I think maybe this Kriya lineage is better because I'm falling asleep over here, and this one's more energetic. And it's really, I thought, well, that's not the correct way to frame it. It's actually a problem for every single meditator. And I've heard Delson talk about this, and this is one of this. I was getting to know Delson through your videos, and he said something. I'm like, that's amazing. I've never heard anybody say that, and that's one of my tricks. And he said, maybe you stop your meditation and you go down and you take a nap, and then you wake up and do your meditation again. I'm like, I've never heard anybody say that, but I do that. I do that trick. And so it's really a balance of brainwaves that we're trying to create. And so you've got your conscious mind, excuse me, the beta brainwave. And we don't want it loud because that would be a stress state. But we don't want it so quiet that we dip completely into the subconscious and we go to sleep. So we're trying to maintain this really fine balance of brainwaves. It's not that fine, but for us, it's quite fine, especially when you're trying to figure out this balance in the beginning. And so you're going down as you quiet the body, you're getting into alpha, theta, delta. And so you're trying to balance all of that with your tiny little beta brainwave. And it's really a balancing act, right? And so that's exactly what you're talking about. And so you're like, I'm going to do the breath of fire. That's perfect. And the Kriya Yoga program actually has that embedded inside of it. So first you learn the first Kriya, which is very, very quiet. And then you learn the second Kriya, which is more energetic. And I can't teach you all of that right here, but I'll
I
give you,
understand. Yeah.
I'm
So
going to
is
give you,
that in the book?
I'm going to give you a piece of, no, it's not in the book. I'm going to give you a piece of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've given this out before. So breathe in, hold the breath, and rotate your head. Only counterclockwise. Only rotate the head counter. So if you're standing behind yourself and you see yourself, you're watching your head go counterclockwise, or the way I think about this is put your chin down and start going to the left, only to the left. And it kind of looks like I'm on the right, but I'm actually going to my left, right here. This is left. Okay? So counterclockwise. That will stimulate your right brain, like a little bit, just not a whole lot, but when you do it more, you stimulate your right brain more.
So how
And the
many
whole-
rotations? 1, 2 rotations of the head?
Like 30.
Wow.
And see if that wakes you back up. And but more importantly, it's to hold in the breath. If you're really sleepy, well, really powerfully hold your breath and make it slightly uncomfortable so it wakes you back up.
Mhm.
And this is just one possibility. But basically, you're trying to balance something
Yeah.
which nobody, who is balancing this? You know who kind of balances this? Professional athletes. You'll see that they've practiced emotion so many times that they can do it in a relaxed manner. They have to be simultaneously very efficient, very active, and very, very relaxed to be a complete professional athlete. So they're kind of creating that balance, but to the degree that we're taking it, there's nobody doing it. Maybe if you're an artist or you're a writer, like a writer would balance this. So like you're doing some creative writing, right? And so you have to keep that conscious mind slightly subdued, enter into your subconscious and get inspiration. Maybe there, but really nobody's doing what we're attempting to do. This incredible balance of just a little. And see, here's the trick. You want a little, but not nothing. And you don't want to, and you want some, but you don't want a lot. So it's a really difficult balance that we're trying to create. And so that's, you're heading straight into it. I call this the gauntlet of sleep that you've got. It's actually a gauntlet. So on the other side, oh, I want to show you. Hold on just a moment. I'm sorry. I'm taking forever, right, to answer this. But I want to show you something. I'll be quick. Hold on. Here. Aren't these cute? These little foo dogs. You put some incense inside and the smoke comes out their mouth. They're so cute. But you go in front of the temples, right? That's what the reason I'm bringing this up. You go in front of the temples and you'll often see there are two guardians outside of the temple, right? Why is that? Because you're trying to get past it. It's actually your conscious mind. I'm sorry, your conscious mind and your subconscious mind that you're trying to get past. And so that's the very delicate balance that you're creating in order so you can perceive a third thing, which is the superconscious mind. And that's what you're trying to get past. So that's why you're trying to very, very delicately get past this gauntlet by creating this incredible balance inside of your brainwaves. So you can actually begin to perceive those immaterial jhanas that Delson was talking about. You're trying to perceive those. And to perceive them, they're very, very subtle. And so when you've got all this stuff in your face, you can't do it. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to shrink that, but not too much. And I'm going to get a little sleepy. I'm going to contact my subconscious and be okay with myself, which is the forgiveness. Everything we're talking about today, it's that forgiveness. And I have to balance all of that. And if there's lots of stuff bubbling up from my subconscious, I can't do it. If there's lots of stuff bubbling up from my conscious mind, I can't do it, because those are the guardians to the third thing, which is the superconscious mind. And that's what you're trying to perceive, but it's very, very subtle. You've got to get everything out of the way. And so you're trying to maintain that balance. And so I just gave you a trick. You have your own trick, which works. Delson has given a trick, and I'm sure many other tricks. And so you just play with those. And maybe one works one day and a different one works another day. And you just have to keep playing with it, because it's really a gauntlet, and nobody can help you in that place. That nobody can, you really have to attempt on your own to get through the gauntlet. And so it is a balancing act, because it's not too much and it's not too little. It's Goldilocks, just right.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Shadi is next.
Thank you so much, John and Delson and Forrest, for staying on past the hour. Quick story. Forrest, I was doing a test for getting a job as part of a process, and it was pattern recognition was the test, and I just couldn't do it. But I did Hakala, and I just went for it, and it was awesome. So I just wanted to share that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was amazing. The question I have is, I've had pain in my body, maybe from a accident as a child, shoulder and in the medulla, pain up through my neck and so forth. But I just walked the Camino where I'm carrying a big backpack and the pain wasn't there. So I'm thinking there's another element to this that's going on. And I just am curious about pain in the body and, processes to work with that or work around it or heal that. Because the pain, particularly on the edge of my scalp, is really, really, I think it's my subconscious preventing me from doing things. Your thoughts?
That's for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So, yeah, I've noticed that myself. It's very interesting that I can be sitting at my computer, hunched over, horrible posture, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. And then I get up and I'm active and I'm doing stuff, and suddenly the pain is completely gone. And there's this activation of muscles which organizes the body correctly. And so what I find in myself is that when I'm in a bad posture from being on my computer or writing or something, then it's causes some tension in the muscles, which is difficult to overcome until you activate the muscles in a different way. And I've actually seen people online where I don't have any of this. It was a long time ago, but they were actually selling a course to learn how to activate the correct muscles to correct your posture. So I would maybe see about, so there's a little exercise, and I have no idea if this would address your particular case, but there's an exercise that I've given where you press your head against the back of the wall and then you suck in your chin. So maybe some postural exercises like that. Magnesium is very helpful for the muscles to help them to relax. And I've used hot and cold creams on muscles, especially around the neck. I've used hot and cold creams, which can be very helpful. Some menthol can be very helpful. So that's how I would start looking at that. Now, spiritually speaking, you can ohm into it. So if you feel the pain and you ohm into the pain, when you get when you have a little bit of experience with the Om Japa, you can ohm into a pain in the body, and you can see that the pain will cease for a moment. And if it's a very bad pain, it will come back up, but you can keep ohming into it, and that will disrupt the pain and cause it to momentarily disappear and give you a momentary relief. So that's a possibility as well. But I would try and look at the structure of the pain and see if there's something in your posture which you can strengthen that would cause the pain to stop, because you have that experience that I activated my muscles and it actually erased the pain.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. And so I'm just going back to the right screen here. Josie is next.
Hi. I just have a question. I have been doing meditation for about 5 years now, but I'm pretty inconsistent. And it's I'll go and I do really well. And every time I do it, I love it. I get these great blissful feelings. But then I always fall off. And I was just wondering, is that like, I don't know, something karmic that I need to work through? Is that something, is there? And I actually just watched one of your videos recently, Forrest, and I'm like, okay, 5 minutes a day. The discipline comes in 5 minutes a day, get started on that. And then as I get more time in, work it back up. But the discipline is in doing it every day. And I was just wondering, like, is there any more tips, or is it something that I just need to work through? Because I'm inconsistent. The only consistent thing about me is my inconsistency.
You know, there's quadrants. I saw this thing one time. They were talking about quadrants of life, and there's the things that I have to do. I have to do them right now because it's an actual emergency, and then there's things that I need to do, but it's not an emergency, and we usually never get to those. And then there's the things that aren't important, but they are emergencies, and so we end up addressing them, like work, you know. And then there's then there's things that aren't emergencies and they aren't important, and we'll waste our time there as well. And so meditation fits in this quadrant, which is really important, not an emergency. And those are often the things we never get to, or they often get sidelined very easily. And so that's why I say, you know, start with 5 minutes, make that consistent. I made a video, it's called the Gold Star Method. I think that's the label that I put on the video. And that little silly, I'm going to give myself a gold star for every 5 minutes, every day that I meditate. It seems so silly, but it really encourages us to keep consistency with meditation. So try and feel a week, then try and feel 2 weeks, then try and feel a month. And when you can do that for 3 months, you've got already an amazing meditative habit, even if it was only 5 minutes. It's really turning into something really beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we'll just go to the chat if everyone's still up for a few more questions. Inez has asked, thank you, Delson and Forrest. Question for Delson. You said these frames that the mind starts to perceive just before entering total equanimity. Can you please talk more in details about what these frames are? Thank you.
Okay, so this is what I was referring to as infinite consciousness, or infinite awareness. So there's the experience of the mind going into spaciousness, where the mind is experiencing expansiveness and there's just nothing but space all around. And then from there, the mind starts to encompass the entire space as awareness itself. There comes a point before the nothingness, and it doesn't happen necessarily all the time, and it doesn't happen necessarily for everyone, and that's not a problem. It shouldn't be seen as a problem. It does happen for some people. It does happen for people who might pay a little bit more attention to this. But what happens is the mind starts to become so clear and so attentive that so we have the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. These are the 6 senses as per the Pali Canon. In yoga and tantra and so on, they divide it up into even further. And in some schools of Buddhism, they divide it up into even further. But for simplicity's sake, let's understand we have these 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the mental sense of the mind. And so each one is taking in contact. So contact, sparsha in Sanskrit, or phassa in Pali, is the initial trigger point in which light hits the eyes, sound hits the ears, odor molecules hits the nose, taste molecules hits the tongue, pressure internally or externally makes contact with the body, and some kind of thought or frequency comes up into the mind. So when these two come together, that's the sense base, like the eyes and so on, and the sense object. When they come together, that's contact. Every time that happens, there's an attention that goes to it. And that attention brings into flow an awareness, some kind of awareness, some kind of cognition that's there. And this frame that we're talking about is the immediate happening in every moment that you see it. So if you were to slow down everything that you're seeing right now, you're seeing every reality at a certain frame rate, at a certain frame per second. But if your mind became very, very attentive, you could see how when you slow it down, there is like a stuttering that happens. And this happens at every sense base. So at infinite consciousness, you're actually experiencing infinite consciousnesses, the arising and passing away of eye consciousness, the arising and passing away of ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. In my own personal experience, I had this when I was in San Diego and I was meditating very deeply. This was actually on my online retreat. And I wasn't taking the online retreat. I was a student of an online retreat with TWIM. David Johnson was my teacher then. And I remember at one point that I came to this space of infinite consciousness, and I was entering the kitchen. And as I was entering the kitchen, everything started to become like jittery, like it just like started stuttering like this, and the people were moving in a very stilted way. And I thought maybe I'm tripping, something is going on here. But actually what's going on is the mind becomes so attentive. It's looking very closely at initial points of contact that are happening all the time. Bhante Vamramsi used to say, now we don't know the exact number, he would say, when you snap your fingers, that's 100,000 per second arising and passing away of sound contact happening all the time in that snap. But it's so seamless, you hear only a snap. It's so seamless, you only see this motion of the hand. But actually, if you slow things down, you would see the hand going like this, very, very stilted. There is precedence of this or examples of this in the Yoga Sutras as well. I think it's either in the third or fourth, maybe in the fourth section, where Patanjali is talking about this point where the mind becomes so immersed in the present moment, in the now, that one can actually step out of time. And what he's talking about is, of course, entering that timeless space, but also being able to see, and he says that gateway is to be able to see what happens just before the now and what happens just after the now. So you're actually literally seeing the frames of now happening, and you jump out of that, which is that timeless nothingness. This is what I'm referring to.
Thank you very much. Since we're out in the never land of the timeless now, here's a bit of an esoteric question from Lincoln. Thank you. Question for both. When it comes to your final transition of this bodily incarnation, what is your personal end game, e.g., Nirodha Samapatti, Mahasamadhi? Why is that what you have landed on? Do you practice anything to prepare? This is for both. So I don't know, Delson, you want to pick it up and then we'll go to Forrest?
Yeah, let me just read the question again. When it comes to your final transition of this bodily incarnation, what is your personal endgame? Nirodha Samapatti, Mahasamadhi. Why is it that what you have landed on? Or why is that what you have landed on? Do you prepare? Do you practice anything to prepare? So I've always told my students, and you'll see it's a little. Sometimes their faces become blank when I say this, which is we're all here meditating because we're preparing how to die. Meditation is the mini death. Meditation is preparing you how to die. Forrest kind of touched upon this when he's talking about acceptance, right? Like you cannot die unless you actually go through that process of acceptance. Meditation is enabling you to do that. In the Pali Canon, it talks about how when people are dying, there's a certain level of confusion that's there in their minds. And the goal there is not to die in confusion, which means you've let go of ignorance. You're not dying, actually. You realize that there is no such thing as death. So since you're talking about esoteric, I'm going to go a little esoteric on you guys now. There is no such thing as death. What we call as rebirth and dying, arising and passing away, is nothing more than a concept that the mind creates. The idea that I have dead loved ones somewhere else or whatever, not actually dead. They're still around. They're still in some other realm or in some other form, in some other kind of energetic capacity. So this is the realization, one of the realizations that you come to, the acceptance that this is not death, that this is not some end process. Now, the traditions will call that entering into the kingdom of heaven, entering Mahasamadhi, entering Parinibbana, all of that. And the doctrinal differences between those will be so many. But at the end of the day, the realization is there is no death.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Good news. Forrest?
Good news. I like it. That's what we're here. We're here for the good news. And that's perfect. So everything that we're doing is preparing us. Everything that we're it's most people live their lives and they think about the Kardashians and the current fashion, and it's just so dazzling, right? But that's really not the heart of the story, is it? It's not the heart at all. And here we are attempting to face the heart of the story. And what I like to say is that we're so upside down. So they have this image in the Bhagavad Gita of the upside down tree. And we think we're right side up, but that tree is telling you, no, you're actually upside down, because the limbs of the tree are your limbs and the roots of the tree is your brain. And so we're attempting to go back into the roots of the tree from whence we came. So the infinite divine has thrown ourselves out. We are, as the infinite divine, threw ourselves into this story, and we're attempting to go back the way that we came. And that's actually the definition of yoga. So they like to say that when the universe was created, yoga was there instantly. And that's simply to say that, look, if you threw something out, well, if you just reverse that process, you're going to go back. And so that's what yoga is attempting. And so we see this world and we say, oh my God, it's so real. And then we look at spirituality, we go, oh my God, it's so thin, it's so subtle, it's so effervescent. How can I grab onto this thing which is not real? And what happens, actually, Yogananda said this. He said that the things that you hold to be real, as we keep going, they're going to go like this. They're going to become more unreal. And the things that you hold to be unreal are going to become more real. And so so in our meditations, we're doing that every single day. As you get to know and feel and sense these subtle things, you are doing that. And it reaches this point where you look at this world and you say, this is not real. And you start to sense behind it the ocean, that vast intelligence, that vast nothingness, that vast consciousness. You start to sense that and feel that, because we got past the gauntlet and we're feeling those subtle, aren't they cute and little fat little dragons, aren't they? That's what I love. They're like, oh my God, they're so cute and fat. So that's the gauntlet that we're getting past. And then on the other side is this very, very subtle thing. And so we're sensing that more and more, and it becomes stronger and stronger. And then you reach a point, you're reaching this kind of tipping point, and you go, oh my God, wait a minute, that is the ocean, and the ocean is real, And the foam that I'm seeing is not real. The foam is simply foam. And that's a really weird place because and that's kind of like, you know, the tipping point, right? Where you're like, okay, this was real, this is unreal. Oh shoot, I had it backwards. And so that's what we're aiming at. And so you can call it, you know, so we're attempting to go into that consciousness. All of us were attempting to feel it. And then the end game, as you asked, we're trying to be that, to be one with that, and to rest in that. And so that would be, so yoga, we would call that the Dharma Mega. We would say that that's Kaivalya or moksha. Yoga has several names for this, right? And then that's, of course, what Delson was talking about. And I think also that's what Buddha meant when he said we're going to break the cycle, right? So same thing. Oh, and by the way, I have questions from my students. John, if you want me to pipe in, let me know at any moment, or maybe we'll run out of time. I don't know.
I'm having fun here, Forrest. I mean, I can keep going. It depends on everybody else. I mean, you know, if you guys want to stay along, go ahead. But you and I can stay, Forrest. It's fine.
Awesome. I love it.
I wanted to just sort of use, I like to at least once use my, I've used my prerogative to ask a question. So I noticed, Forrest, that you have the two dragons, and one appears to have its mouth open and one appears to have it closed, if I'm not mistaken. And so I live in Japan, and when you go into temples and shrines, you see they have the guardians of the threshold at all those temples. And usually when you're going in, they're scary. And then when you look back from inside the temple, inside the gate, they're peaceful. But the other thing is they have one mouth open, one mouth closed. And the Japanese say one is going oh or ah, and the other one is going And so they're saying om together. So is that your understanding, and or what's your understanding of this?
Oh yeah, that I would say that that's absolutely true, and that's beautiful. I love that. That's very interesting. So they're saying the universal. So you have the Christians, Amen, and you've got the yogis saying Om, and so yeah, you'll see it everywhere. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Well, so there's all these little metaphors and you can take them in different ways. So I'm just presenting one way, which you can find some of that in the book Mejda, where he's mentioning these two forces. And that's from the great grandson of Lahiri, actually. So it's attributed to Yogananda, but it actually came from the great grandson of Lahiri, which
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that so he the brother of Yogananda who wrote Mejda, he put some of the teachings of his teacher, which was Satya Sharan Lahiri, and so in the book it's attributed to Yogananda, but it's actually from. So he'll talk about these two forces, and he says that they're in the spiritual eye, and so one will scatter your attention, and so think about that. What part of your brain would scatter your attention? Well, that's the conscious mind. That's the left brain. And he says the other one will throw a veil over your vision and subdue you, put you into Maya. And so you think about the sleepy subconscious and that stupor that falls over us. That's exactly the part of the mind. So I'm just saying there's another level here. So there's many levels, and here's one. And it's kind of beautiful way to think about it, that we're trying to get past those two, and then we enter into the temple.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So just because we're coming up to the 2 hour mark, I'm just going to say that thank you to everyone who can't stay. And our next talk next week will be the title is Tradition and Innovation. So we'll be delving into those topics next week. And then I'm just going to throw it open, Forrest, if you have questions, or if the two of you want to, as you like.
Beautiful. Thank you, John. And thanks to everybody who came. And if you have to run, we totally understand. And thank you, Delson, for leading us in the charge and saying we'll just stick with it. So this is from 2 of my students. Hi, Forrest. Maybe you can ask Delson if he thinks Kriya Yoga does not lead to enlightenment. He said this in a previous video, so maybe you would like to comment on that.
Okay. I don't think anything really leads to enlightenment. I think enlightenment, as we understand it, is a concept. So whether it's Kriya Yoga, whether it's TWIM, whether it's prayer, or whatever it is, these are all techniques. These are all processes to stabilize the mind, right? But enlightenment happens when you least expect it. What people call enlightenment, what they call awakening, what they call this process of nirvana or nibbana or whatever, it happens when you least expect it. There's a really great show called Upanishad Ganga. It's a show that was produced by Chinmaya Mission. And it's in Hindi, but there might be a version of it out on YouTube. I recommend it. It's a really good show, about 20 or 30-minute episodes. And there's one episode in which there's a guy named Ashtavakra. He's a very big sage in Hinduism and Vedanta. But this is the story of him as a young person going to King Janaka's court, where they would have these debates about, scripture, about Shastra, as they say in Sanskrit, about scripture, about philosophy, about what is right, what is wrong, what is the way, what is not the way. And so he goes and he's there to debate with this other guy who is the champion of all debaters over there. And it's sort of like a competition, but it's also a symposium kind of place. And it's a very dangerous competition because the loser has to take what's known as Jal Samadhi, which means they have to go into the water and drown themselves. It's a very archaic sort of thing. And so Ashtavakra goes there to challenge this guy because this guy challenged his father and his father lost. So he goes there as out of a way to vindicate, that thing. Of course, in the debate itself, what happens is they talk about different parts of philosophy, and they talk about that ultimate, the enlightenment process, the nibbana, awakening, whatever you want to call it, moksha, mukti. And they say, does meditation help? And the one guy says, it helps, but it doesn't lead to it. And he says, does mantra take you there? He's like, mantra helps, but it doesn't lead you to it. Does prayer lead you there? He said, it helps, but it doesn't lead you to it. Does reason and logic lead you there? No, it only takes you as far as that precipice. So nothing is going to take you to awakening. It's by what some people will call grace, and what, let's say, the TWIM practice will call letting go of all expectation, right? Technique doesn't equal awakening. Technique is just the stepping stones, but the actual awakening will happen when you least expect it. That's my answer.
Beautiful. Love it. Perfect. I have one more question. I think this is a pretty good one. And Delson, this person is asking, you go into meditation, you've quieted the body, you have reached some of the initial jhanas, you're getting into a fairly deep state, and still there's a little bit of chatter. How would you address that chatter from your standpoint in the meditation?
Yeah, so this happens a lot for people who come to me in practice on retreats, where they're saying that there's always like chatter in the background. And there's a couple of ways to look at it. Either that chatter is the perception part of the mind, which is still labeling things. And so it's just a commentator. It's like, oh, look at this. Oh, this is what's going on now. This is what's going on now. If that's what's happening, then it's just an extension, or it's just a emanation of mindfulness, where you're aware of how mind's attention moves from one thing to the other. But if we're talking about like chatter in terms of verbal chatter, or things that are like sort of a restless kind of energy, then that's where you need to do that balancing act again, because that's where, you know, using your context, Forrest, of the beta and alpha band waves, you have to now reduce beta and bring up a little bit more alpha. And so I've always talked about these enlightenment factors, which is 7 enlightenment factors according to the Buddha. You have mindfulness, you have investigation, you have energy, you have joy, you have tranquility, you have collectedness, and you have equanimity. And so taking away mindfulness, you have 6. Mindfulness is the base. Mindfulness means just being aware of things as they are and noticing what's happening in the present moment. It's like you're in the present moment, but you're also noticing where your mind is moving so that you can gently redirect it to where it needs to be for the practice of meditation. Now, there's 3 beta factors and there's 3 alpha factors using your context, let's say. So to bring up a little bit of more beta, which is more energy, what do you need? You need more joy, because joy excites, joy, you know, brightens things up. You need investigation. Investigation doesn't mean we analyze into things. We become more curious. We become more open with interest of what's going on. It's like we're focusing a little bit more on what's going on. And you need energy, which means what? Tightening the lens of our focus. That's how we deal with the energizing part. Let's say we're too energetic. So what do? We balance it with the alpha, which is what? It's tranquility. So we actually consciously relax back into the present moment by anchoring the mind back to the mind and body. We bring some collectedness. What does collectedness mean? We start to experience a little bit more of, you know, a little bit more of like an awareness of what's going on. There's more attention to what's going on. And we have what's known as equanimity. Equanimity is essentially remaining neutral, remaining detached, remaining present, yet unaffected by what's happening. And if you treat the energy, the vibrations or the verbal chatter, if that's what it is, as just little kids playing around, what do you do with that? You just let them do what they're doing. You don't engage with them and you just relax into the background. Because you're not giving them that much attention, they start to just, you know, tire themselves out and they dissipate. So that would be my response to it.
That was brilliant. Beautiful. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. I guess this might be the end, huh, for today?
I think so. There is a question about God and the existence of God. I don't know if you want to address that. It's for you, Delson.
It's for
Can I
me.
read it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So namaste from Rudra Prasad. Namaste. All the videos saying Buddha was an atheist bothered me a lot. I think Buddha teachings are very appropriate in our world. I did a little research, and my take is that Buddha discovered that conquering the mind and understanding the self is a Himalayan hurdle. So let's focus on our own selves before debating or discovering God. The soul search may take a lifetime or more, but it is a necessary and vital step. Do you agree?
Wow. It's quite a question. I'm trying to assess that question, trying to figure out exactly what that is referring to.
Is there a God? Maybe that's it.
Well, I did a little research and my take is that Buddha discovered that conquering the mind. So let's focus on ourselves before debating or discovering God. This search may take a lifetime. Okay, well, that's the thing again, right? I mean, these kinds of questions come from a mind that is seeking the ultimate answer. And the idea of an ultimate answer is the need for some kind of security, the need for some kind of like stability. And that comes again from the comparing mind. Is there a God? Is there not a God? Is there a self? Is there not a self? Is there a soul? Is there not a soul? That's all mentation. That's all mental gymnastics, you know. Better to focus on yourself, I would say. Better to focus on figuring out, how can I first cease my suffering, which is all of this, you know, continuous activity in here, in the left part of the brain, let's say, in coming into the right. And then you will see for yourself what is the actual truth. The issue here, if I could call it an issue, or the challenge here, is how do you translate all of the findings that you have from the right brain, the findings that you have from the medulla, and verbalize that? It's that old adage of the finger pointing to the moon, right? We look at the moon and then we're looking at the finger. We forget about the moon, right? So our discovery of truth is individual. This is what I believe in. It is according to your particular experience of how you see things. In the Vedas, talk about how all rivers lead to the same ocean, that the paths leading to truth are many, but there's that one truth. And I think that's sufficient enough to that extent, because all of this doctrinal stuff happened after the fact. We truly don't know what the words of the Buddha are. We truly don't know what the words of Jesus are. We truly don't know what the words of Patanjali are. We can only use the evidence that we have and use our own experience as our guideline, and the reference of these scriptures as a way of corroborating that, if we can. And this is where I would advise you to focus on your own experience, use that as a reference, the scriptures. And what does not, what seems like a cultural injunction, or what seems like something steeped in some kind of societal ideas, take that away. Remove that. Focus on the cream, which is experience, technique, practice, and insight. Everybody's understanding of that insight will be different. And that's the beauty of this life. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. We do have one more hand up. It's Alexander.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think my question just got answered, actually, but I'll ask it anyway. It was also for Delson, but I wish if Forrest could comment on it also. And it's about Nirodha Samapatti, or the cessation event, or Nibbana. And we call it deep nothingness in Kriya, or the stone samadhi, or Turiya. I just found out. And I'm asking from a place of a bit of fear and bewilderment, because this state kind of freaks me out. I guess I've touched on it somehow through contemplating, and I've had insights where it seemed like it was the absolute unmanifest, or it was Shiva, or it was an experience of the subject with no object, just pure self. So I wanted Delson to bring it a bit closer to a Kriya Yogi, this state of cessation. What does it mean? How does it relate to God? Like, because this is the peak of Buddhism, this absolute paranibbana, or whatever. And how does that play into Satchitananda?
So in Buddhism, there's always this debate of self versus no self. And there's always been this this confusion, for lack of a better word, about what the Buddha said with reference to self or not self. And there's always been this misconception that the Buddha said that there is no self. As far as I have understood it, what he said is there is not self. So he understood the idea of self with regards to the Sat Chit Ananda, which is Sat, ever existing. It's It's independently existing. Chit, it is conscious, it is consciousness. Ananda, it is bliss, it is joy. And he took that as the touchstone and he said, okay, let's say that that is what the self is. And he compared it to everything that we see in our world, everything that we're experiencing in our world. And that's where the understanding of the three characteristics comes about, where he said that all conditioned experience, all conditioned phenomena, being conditioned is subject to change. Therefore, it is impermanent. It is conditioned and dependent. So it can't be sat. It cannot be self-existing. It is causing suffering one way or the other. Even if it's a temporal kind of happiness, being conditioned, it will go away when the conditions go away. Therefore, it's dukkha. Therefore, it's suffering. Therefore, conditioned reality, conditioned phenomena cannot be seen as self. And that which is Satchitananda, that which is Godhood, that which is Brahman, that which is Nibbana, that which is Nirvana, is beyond the confines of time, space, and causation. And this experience of subject without object, that is what in the practice that I'm teaching is called signless awareness of mind. It's an objectless awareness of the mind. It's just pure subjectivity. And the only reason why it might be scary, or one of the reasons why it might be a bit concerning or unsettling, is one is maybe the mind is not used to that. And second is because the mind is taking something smaller as self, and it feels like that self is dying, and therefore it's not feeling comfortable. But if you open up the mind to this greater self of subjectivity and you relax into it, then it's a lot of fun.
That was beautiful. That was really beautiful. Alexander, did you hear that? That was perfect. And so it's just one tiny correction for you, Alexander, that the stone samadhi is something totally different. So the stone samadhi means that you fell asleep in the samadhi. And so it's not so you didn't get the benefit, you didn't get the experience of the samadhi. Okay, but everything else was, and Delson, that was absolutely brilliant. And so this is exactly what I was saying, right? That the thing which I thought was real is not real. And because we thought it was us for so long, we're like, that's when the fear arises, right? As Delson was commenting. And so this thing which was unreal is becoming really big inside of your mind. And so you're right on that teeter-totter and you're like, oh God, which way am I going to go? And you need time sometimes to accept one or the other. And so that's where you've got to be patient with yourself. But Delson, that was said beautifully, just relax and let go into something bigger. Notice the point which you are holding, which is small. And notice that, this is the attachment which is causing the pain, right? And if I can just accept that the ocean, and what is helpful is to think about all the things that I notice that this is helpful for me, is that think about all the things which are eternal. And those are often the things which you love. Love is eternal. I love love. Gratitude is eternal. I love gratitude. Souls are eternal. I love souls. I love the heart of somebody, the soul of them, right? All these things which we can appreciate, which are eternal. Kindness is eternal. I love kindness. All these eternal things are what make life worth living and which are gorgeous. And it's all the temporary things, the foam on the surface of the ocean, which is we get attached to, but is often meaningless. I mean, who wore this dress? Who showed up at the gala? I mean, all the pointless things, right? And we get so worked up, right? And it's so ridiculous. and it's kind of funny, and so you can have a sense of humor about that. And you notice that as you go through the meditation process, things get quite funny, so just sit back and look at your life and look at life in general, and start getting the humor in it, because it's really a cosmic joke that the thing that you thought was real is not real, and the thing which is actually real and eternal and is supporting you constantly. I mean, can you imagine? So think about this. Your whole life is backed up by Sat Chit Ananda. And if there is no Sat Chit Ananda, there is no Alexander, right? So the thing that you call yourself, these are those eternal things. I am a soul. Yes, that's the eternal thing. I am consciousness. Yes, that's the eternal thing. So those are all the eternal things. The things which you are actually pointing at yourself to say, this is what is real, those are actually the eternal things. And so you can separate those two. And that will help you to lose your fear, but it is a process, and I know you're deep in it. So I really love Delson's answer. So I hope you can hear that.
Thank you. I did some investigation into my subconscious to find out where the fear comes from, and it wasn't just extinction. It was a fear that this whole love story of life would somehow get lost somewhere. It's not eternal. This not only my story, but this whole story of this world and all the beautiful things that happened in it, that it's somehow gonna go into oblivion, and that scared me. But it's not.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. So think about this. What is the definition of omnipotence? Right?
Yeah.
The definition of omnipotence is that you know everything. So that which is Satchit Ananda, that which is eternal, do you think it's possible that it can forget if it is following the definition of omnipotence?
Yeah.
Well, that would be impossible, wouldn't it? It would actually be impossible to forget, right? And so I think it was Yogananda said that every single act of goodness or kindness, or I can't remember exactly what he said, it was all written on the heart of God permanently. That's kind of beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And so he's alluding to that omnipotence, that there is nothing which is lost, nothing. That every single act that you do in meditation is written down, right?
That's beautiful. That's just what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so I think now we really are officially over the time. And so I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and thanks Forrest and Delson for doing this. And if you have any last comments, we're gonna reconvene again next week and talk about tradition and innovation. But yeah, just over to you, Delson and Forrest, before we close.
I would like to just thank Forrest for his wisdom and all of the funny anecdotes that he has. And I love you sharing those two little chubby dragons. I got to find a couple for myself. It's going to be great reminders for me. I love that. And John, I mean, you are a champion. Like, I don't even know what time it is there for you now, man. But it's like,
I don't
wow.
know either. It's 10 to 4. But I'm loving this. I wouldn't miss it.
So I really love vibing with you guys. Thank you so much for your time, energy, and attention. And I do hope to see you all again next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delson.
Nice to be with you. Could stay hours with you.
You have. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Really amazing. Thank you. Thank you both, John and Delson, and thank you to everybody that came and stayed with us so long. And I just want to hug all of you. So thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Yep. Take care. Good night. Goodbye.